Welcome back. Today we are discussing the four main practical considerations of euthanasia. These considerations are accessibility, patient autonomy, the line of continuum argument, and suicide alternatives. Accessibility is a huge factor in healthcare already, due to how inaccessible it is for many. This is a personal concern of mine when considering legalized euthanasia. Currently, hospice care is accessible to many of the terminally ill, and thus passive euthanasia is not a huge problem at this time. Active euthanasia, however, is a huge problem considering that assisted suicide is still inaccessible in many states across America. A policy that is blended with those of predecessing countries and states where euthanasia is legal should be created as a foundation for legalization in the country and later reviewed and revised in order to improve. Regarding the matter of consent, there will be a varied matter regarding accessibility since there will be a need for an additional screening process put into place in order to determine who can and cannot be euthanized. Overall, this is a fairly easy issue to resolve. Regarding patient autonomy, I firmly believe that it is unconstitutional to deny a patient their right to death. In the Declaration of Independence, it states that inalienable rights fall under the categories of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we Americans truly have the right to our life and liberty, then we should also have the right to the freedom of choice regarding how we end the life that we manage. This also follows under the right to follow in pursuit of happiness, because in ending the suffering of an incurable illness and/or disorder, we can end a life filled with misery and suffering. As for the ethical line of continuum argument that states that there is a gray area in which the mercy killings go from morally right to morally wrong, a tough screening process or processes may be put into place in order to determine the eligibility of those being euthanized. Voluntary euthanasia can have a consult of 2 doctors and a medical professional. Minors can require that plus parental consent. Non-voluntary and involuntary euthanasia can use 2 doctors, 2 psychiatrists to confirm incompetence, and in the case where there is a consenting party on behalf of the patient, to confirm that the consenting party is competent and signing off on euthanasia for unselfish reasons. Finally, a judge can be put into place to determine that each case is legally fit for euthanasia. Finally, let's talk about suicide alternatives. In many cases, a hospice patient may starve themselves prior to their death in order to speed up the process. Many accept this form of passive euthanasia and do not take any measures to prolong the life of the dying. I have seen this firsthand. When I was 18, I worked as a caregiver in an elderly facility. In this facility, I did a lot of hospice care and aided people in their transition to death. One day, there was a man that transferred in for comfort care as provided by hospice. He stopped eating and starved himself for 2 weeks. The only thing he'd drink was orange Fanta soda that I got for 50 cents out of the facility vending machine. I'd buy him one every night. He eventually got too weak to sip the soda from a straw, and at that point he stopped drinking as well. I was working graveyard shifts, and one night I saw that his skin had looked somewhat jaundiced and he looked a little bit paler than usual. So I went in to check on him, and we have a procedure in entering rooms. We knock, we greet the patient, and then we state our business. So basically what happened was, we'll call him John Doe for the sake of the story, said, "John Doe, it's Lillian. I'm coming in to check on you and make sure that you're all right." So I was getting no response because he was dead, and when you go into this sort of field, you don't actually fully know when someone's dead because the body is still warm. But even though they look a little bit jaundiced and pale, there's still like this question in your mind of like, are they dead or are they just really, really, really relaxed right now and about to die? So it's like an awkward position when you're trying to tell someone, hey, I gotta check your pulse and your breathing, when you're like, what if they're not dead and they're saying, you're like, really, do you think I'm dead? I'm like alive. And I know it doesn't really matter that much because usually they're about to die and they're so medicated and all that, it doesn't actually register. But at the same time, I feel awkward about it because I know what I'm doing, and I'm like, so I'm politely telling this guy everything I'm doing, like checking his pulse, checking his respirations as I'm doing it because I don't want to offend him, even though he's like dead. And I'm sitting here like, man, I'm like 99% sure this man is dead, right? So, okay, I get no pulse, I get no respirations. At this point, I call in my med tech, and she calls in a hospice nurse, and that's the person who can legally determine a time of death. So time of death is determined, and we had to move his roommate out of the room because of the whole thing that was going on. We're like, how do you like tell this guy like, hey, don't worry about the coroners and stuff? And the roommate happened to be awake during all of this too, so I'm sitting here like, gosh, I've got to keep this guy calm. I've got to make sure the dead guy is taken care of. I've got to direct coroners in here. Like, it was a crazy night. It really was. And you know, when I was checking on that guy, after these 2 weeks of starvation, he was so emaciated. He looked almost like those pictures of Holocaust victims coming out of the concentration camps. Like, that, that is just burned in my mind forever. So, I'm trying to figure out where I am here because kind of went off my transcript. But essentially, if you were to ask me, allowing a patient to go through those 2 weeks of starvation and all of that suffering and getting to the point where they're too weak to drink even soda from a straw, I think that is doing more harm to that patient in regards to suffering than just saying, hey, I know you're trying to speed up this process. Would you like a little bit of help? We can give you enough morphine that you'll just fall asleep and that'll be that. So that is kind of my main argument here in this podcast, is that there are suicide alternatives, but those shouldn't be someone's only choices. Hey, it's on you. You've got to starve yourself. There should be more options. They're called alternatives for a reason, right? There should be more alternatives than just the alternative that you think is most moral and ethical because it's passive euthanasia and your hands are washed clean of it. It's ridiculous. So, with that heated discussion in my ethics and my story, I'll call this one an end.